Hi there, Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat, where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So before we begin, just type in your name and say where you're from. Hi, Catherine from Yorkshire, Mervyn from Skegness, Louisa, Valentina, I assume from Glastonbury, Stephanie from Utah. It's lovely to see familiar names. Hi, Ellie, Jan, Tricia, Jason from Maine. Hi, Gunter from Switzerland. Gunter was on our online ceremony at the weekend. Hi, Lisa. Happy spring to you as well. Hi, hi, Pauline. Andrew. Wonderful from Minneapolis, Lancashire. And hi, Ben from Sydney, Australia. Well done for getting up so early. And Sybil from New Orleans. Wonderful. Absolutely great to see you all. And hi, Lewis from Tucson. Ah, great. And hi, John, and JJ from Stroud, wonderful. Illinois, Orkney. Hi, Marianne, and Jules, and from Bordeaux, and Wexford. That's good. Hi, John. Lovely to see you in Buckinghamshire. Wonderful. And hi, Carola from Germany. So let me introduce this week's guest, and it is Maria Ede-Weaving. You're so welcome, Maria.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Eimear.
For our viewers is that those of you who have ever emailed me or Philip may have had a response from Maria. Maria is our indispensable PA. So it's just so lovely to have you as a guest. You are in Portsmouth, aren't you?
Yes. I am. I'm in Portsmouth, which is on the south coast of England. It's actually a naval port.
Oh, go on.
So it's got a lot of naval history. We have the Victory, the very famous ship, Nelson's very famous ship, in our harbour. But yeah, no, it's an interesting place. It's actually, well, you wouldn't know it if you visited it, but it's actually an island. And I think it was back in the 60s they kind of reclaimed some land from the harbour and put a motorway in. But before that, there was just two little bridges that brought you onto Portsea Island. So because of that, because it's actually an island, it's, as a city, it's not been able to sort of spread out. So we're very densely populated. There's not a huge amount of green space.
Okay.
But we are surrounded by the sea, and there are those little kind of magic places, you know, kind of Druidry encourages us all to find nature in strange places, unexpected places, and Portsmouth's got a few of those things. So I'm very lucky to be very close to a very, very beautiful cemetery, big old Victorian cemetery, and it's lovely. It's covered in crocuses and covered in
wonderful,
beautiful flowers at the moment, spring flowers. So yeah. But
somebody says, Ian Longhurst, I used to live in Cowplain and remember when Warrior came in. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, absolutely. I used to live in Horndine, whoever that person is. I was brought up in Horndine, which is the next kind of little village on from Cowplain, although they've all kind of joined up together now. Yeah, I do remember the Warrior coming in. Yeah, the Warrior's, again, another amazing ship that's in our harbour.
Oh, brilliant. So Liz Cruz says, great to put a face to Maria, who's been very helpful to me, many others. So you're going to be getting a lot of these. And Ellie Tallet says she lived in Gosport for a while. So,
oh gosh, me too. Yeah, I lived in Gosport for a wee while, and then Leon Solent, which is a little way along the coast. I lived there for 6 years. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting place. I mean, for a large amount of the time that I've lived in Portsmouth, I spent a good few years trying to get away, and somehow I've always kind of been drawn back for one reason or another, whether it be jobs, family. I spent a year in Scotland, in Glasgow, which was wonderful. I love Scotland, but somehow I've ended back here. But as I've got older, I've really begun to appreciate the place. And it's interesting when you see other areas close to Portsmouth. Portsmouth is actually surrounded by two big kind of natural harbours, And on the eastern side, we have Langston Harbour, which now actually has grey seals in it, which is amazing.
Oh, wonderful.
It's a treat for all of us when they started turning up. But and you get a real sense of what Portsmouth would have been like before it became a city. So there's a lot of marshland, and that it's very flat. So you get those really broad, wide skies. And there's something about that. There's something quite melancholic, I think, about sort of marshland.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a mixture of melancholy and something else. I can't quite articulate it, but
there's a stillness. There's a stillness to a marsh that somehow it can be absolutely wonderful or it can be stagnant. There's that kind of tension maybe between the two.
Yeah.
And that brings that melancholic. I always think the melancholy there's a stillness to it, or maybe a stagnation or a fear of stagnation, rather than a lively sense of movement. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that it's the flatness as well. I think that sense that you see everything around you. There's no surprises.
That's right.
And I think for a long time I didn't enjoy that. You know, I always yearned for Cornwall. I love Cornwall. It was like that idea of kind of rockiness and that wildness. Right. There's a different kind of wildness, but I definitely appreciate it more now as I've got older. Yeah.
Yes, Helen Simmons says, I live in Middleton-on-Sea and know Portsmouth very well. When I was younger, I have trained with Portsmouth Karate Club. More recently, used to take my grandson to football training when he was in Portsmouth. Oh. Old Portsmouth is so lovely, the cobble streets and the harbour.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, there's Ellie now says there's quite a connection to the other world in marshland.
Yes.
Neath land or sea. And I think so, because are there mists?
Yeah, we do get mists, and I mean, I like that being by the sea anyway, and you still hear foghorns, which I love. I've got this real thing about foghorns. That sound, like lying in bed, sound is kind of really, really comforting. But no, I know that kind of. I think the thing with marshland is that what Ellie says is it's kind of not quite land, not quite sea, and that so much of there's a place quite close to me here called Milton Common, which is it's kind of sort of rough land tracks. You look out over the harbour, but up until I think about 80 years ago, it was sea. So the very kind of bit by bit, it's silted up, and suddenly it's got marshy, and then there's more. I mean, I find that fascinating. You know, that the seas.
I think
it's no when we have storms. You know, the sea comes up through the grass sometimes. You know, so that's kind of fascinating. You sense that fact. There's almost like a floating island. You know, but yeah.
And it's lovely because it's nature coming back or asserting itself rather than it being man-made, isn't it?
Yeah. It's never that far away. You're reminded of it all the time, even if you are in a really densely populated urban area. It's always there.
And what's it like to have that awareness? You know, when you say it's always there. What's that like for you?
So important. It's I think it is for everybody, really. I mean, you kind of see. I mean, I always think it's quite interesting in cities where you see people trying to reclaim a little piece of nature for themselves. I mean, I live in a sort of very small sort of terraced house, and there are lines and lines and lines of terraces. But of course, every single one of those terraces has a little garden. Yeah. And if you step out into the back garden and you look down the line, you just see it is like this little green motorway. You know, people have that little space which they reconnect in their own way to nature. I mean, some people don't, but I think the majority of people do. There's always that sense. And when you have access to green space like the cemetery, people are there. People spend time there. You can see, even though you live in an urban environment, there's always that pull for people. Everybody needs that connection and that peace that it gives you. The sea as well. I mean, you see it with people flock to the sea. It amazes me that people. The sea is a magnet for people, I think. So, and it impacts on you, doesn't it? It's necessary for your well-being. It's necessary for people's mental well-being. particularly at the moment as well.
Oh,
So we've been very lucky, I think, to have the sea. Yeah.
yeah. I think. Where are you drawn most to? Someplace like the cemetery? I just see. I'm imagining. Okay, there are trees in the cemetery. I don't know if they are, but you're talking about that. Like, there's the green motorway, but then I have a sense of a sea of crocuses, and then you actually have the marshy sea. Um, where are you drawn most to in nature? The sea or the green?
Do you know, it's funny. I mean, I've lived so close to the sea for sort of most of my life, and certainly as a child, I was obsessed with the sea. You know, and when I lived in Hundine, which is about 14 miles outside of Portsmouth, you know, my family and I would often go to Hayling Island, which is the next island on from Portsmouth, which has sand dunes. You know, our beaches are very shingly, very painful to walk on, but going to the sand dunes was just this amazing thing. I just wanted to be in the water all the time. So I was a very watery child. But I think as I've got older, I yearn for the woodland. You know,
Okay.
I think, I mean, I lived in Lee-on-Solent. I was very lucky to live on the seafront. My flat looked out over the sea. I saw the sea every single day of my life. And I never thought that I would ever have that feeling that I didn't want that anymore. There is in the sea a constant churning and movement, which is part of its beauty.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I was yearning for that stillness. You know, you can never, even on a calm day with the sea, there's always that sense of movement. And I don't know whether it was because I was in a kind of state of mind where there was a sense of upheaval in my life at that particular point in time. So that landscape was reflecting something in me, and I think that happens quite often in our relationship with landscape. We see our inner life outside of us, and so I think I was desperate for some kind of peace and stillness. So the sea felt very disturbing, which is strange, because I think that kind of relationship we have. I mean, you know, in Druidry, we call in circle, and we're always thinking about our relationship to the elements, and I think people have favourite elements or elements feel kind of more in tune with. And I always felt like a watery girl, you know, that I felt like there was some kind of peace and healing in water, but I didn't feel it at that point in time. And I thought that was interesting, because I think that relationship we have with the elements, sometimes we need an opposite of that, or something that counterbalances that, really, to feel ourselves. And maybe that's something we learn as we get older. You know, and I know Jung had that kind of idea that we all have the elements in us, and we have certain dominant ones, but really you are always looking to find the ones that you struggle with, to integrate those, to actually feel or grow. Absolutely. Or whatever. So yeah, I kind of started to really yearn for things that were very earthy, which is probably why I spend a lot of time in the cemetery, because there are very beautiful mature trees, and it's kind of surrounded. There's a boundary around it, so it's almost like a little sacred grove. Actually, it feels like it's contained, you know, whereas the sea is something that's
vast and limitless.
Yeah.
And often I have somebody, I want to come back to the cemetery, but somebody has a question for you. Ben Stimson, do you find being in such a regimented space like terraced houses, do you become more aware of activist nature making itself known in your urban landscape?
Sorry, could you?
Okay, do you become more aware of activist nature? I think he means active nature, or making itself known in your urban landscape.
Do you mean kind of nature making itself more?
I think so. I think that's probably what Ben means. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think in any man-made landscape, there's a sense of it being there. You know, you've only got to look at the cracks in the pavement. As soon as there's a crack in the road, something will grow.
That's right.
So there's always that sense. I mean, I watched a program a couple of weeks ago about I think it might have been Ben Fogle going back to Chernobyl and just going to the town. I can't remember the name of the town now, but just seeing how nature has taken over, even an environment that's obviously been really badly polluted and damaged. That sense of nature taking over is extraordinary. That's happened so quickly. So you feel that in the city the whole time. I think there's that like throbbing under the tarmac of something wild and ancient. You know, you can never really get away from that. It's always there. But whether other people sense it, I don't know. I suppose it depends where your focus is. Because of course the other thing about being in a town is that you are with people. There are other things going on, and there are other elements of human nature going on, which actually I really appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
It's interesting. When I lived in Dublin, which is the city, I loved seeing the space, the unused space between buildings, and buddleia trees. You know, the butterfly trees would be popping up, and just that bit of well, it wasn't guerrilla gardening because it was guerrilla nature, where it's like you say, any crack they'd pop up. That somehow in the strangest of places, and you wonder, how do they manage trees when you think this is all concrete and asphalt? How do they manage to do it? And yet they do, and I always find that so fascinating.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I lived in a kind of shared house, big old Edwardian house at one point that had a big old wall garden out the back, and it had a buddleia sat on top of the wall. And its roots were in the tiniest amount of soil. They'd probably just blown there. But it was this huge, great, beautiful buddleia bush that had grown there. Yeah.
That reminds me of rowan trees do the same. In Carr-Gomm, which is a beautiful sacred site in Sligo. Whoever gets to Sligo, it's a must. And there are lots of cairns. But there's one place where it's a very old, gnarled rowan tree, because it, like your buddleia, it's growing in the cleft of a rock. There's no big trunk. You can just see the small short trunk with a canopy, and you kind of wonder, where are its roots? You know, going into the tiniest of places. I mean, that's magic. Then you think of how trees, and whose roots are sensitive but incredibly resilient and strong, to be able to find, and persistent, to be able to find that way, to find the crack, to find that space in which to flourish. It's
it happens in the seafront as well. You know, you've got like kind of the western side going down towards Old Portsmouth. They've tried to keep it clear. Obviously, it's a tourist thing, but towards the eastern side of the seafront, it's kind of quite wild. So it's covered in sea cabbage. I love that.
Yeah.
After walking along the seafront, suddenly the sea cabbage appears and grass on the stones and stuff like that. And I love that fact that, you know, I mean, the whole seafront would be like that if they just left it, which I'd be quite happy with. But yeah, it's amazing, you know. Life will happen.
It will indeed. So you mentioned, you know, what the importance of the cemetery, I suppose, in your practice as a druid. What brought you to Druidry?
Druidry. Oh gosh, it was a long journey, really. I suppose in some ways I came quite late to OBOD. It took me a while to sort of find my way there. I mean, I was actually brought up a Methodist. I was christened into the Church of England, but my mum attended a very tiny little Methodist chapel in our village, and it was it was really an important part of my life from the age of about 4 to 13. I did Sunday school and Bible classes and Bible exams and all that stuff. But that changed when I was 13, because my mum was diagnosed with cancer. And my mum, from sort of diagnosis to her death, it was 3 months, less than 3 months. So it was incredibly brutal, really swift. And my mum had cancer of the esophagus, so she effectively starved to death. So it was, for me, I mean, as a 13-year-old, I mean, it was traumatic. It was just really, really awful. And up until that stage, my relationship with death, I think, had been, I don't know, very pink and fluffy. You know, it was like it was pink and fluffy and had Jesus at the end of it, and it was lovely. And then, of course, it was my first real experience of how visceral death can be. It was a whole side of death, which was, you know, it was just completely blew my world apart. And I think I remember at that point sort of trying to turn to like the elders in my church and kind of asking questions. I think at 13 you don't have the emotional and psychological language to articulate what's happening to you. But I knew I kind of wanted answers. I knew suddenly I felt terrified of life because the thing that had happened. And I couldn't really get those answers from the church. I mean, it's not to say they weren't there and there weren't viable answers there, but nothing was resonating with me. And so I think from that point on, really, I think that was the beginning of my journey. I think it happens quite often with people that you have something that's just so awful that becomes a catalyst for your spiritual journey. And at the same time, you know, my dad, who at that point, because I was only 13 and my other siblings had left home, he decided to give up work for that point in time. I mean, my mum was only 54 when she died, so he was still quite young, but he decided to give up work for the time being, so that I wouldn't be like a latchkey kid, really. I think he wanted to be there, which was wonderful. Yeah. It was really brilliant of him. And he started to have his own little epiphanies, really. So he started, well, firstly, he was really severely grieving and couldn't stay in the house. So he started to walk. And because we lived in a village, he was kind of walking out in nature. I mean, you didn't walk far before you were out in the middle of nowhere. So he started just to cope with the grief. And then kind of over time, that coping strategy started to become a passion. And then he started to he was getting books out of the library about trees and wildflowers and wildlife. Wow. And at the same time, he was really getting into green politics. And he would also bring home these books about kind of yoga and meditation and Taoism and all these things. So I was kind of exposed to all of the stuff really through my dad. So I started walking in nature, and I began to understand that feeling of peace, or that potential healing that you can get through that contact with nature. And also feeling this urge to kind of explore otherworldly things. Mm-hmm. I got really into astrology at that point. That was through my dad as well. He brought home an astrology book and decided he wanted to kind of draw up his chart. And so I thought, right. And then I got interested in that idea that I think particularly with astrology was the starting point that somehow your salvation was in self-awareness. Okay. I knew I was struggling. I knew, you know, I was having these terrible, terrible kind of nightmares about my mum and stuff like that. I knew I was struggling, and I was desperately trying to find some kind of answer. And I thought, I think I had that little epiphany that I had to start in here, but I kind of had to find some kind of framework by which to do that, really. I was scrabbling around in the dark, really. But so that was really the beginning. And I started to do yoga and I started to meditate. And that really was, I think, the first kind of chink of light. I suddenly realized the power of meditation, that it could really help you, because I really was struggling. But I didn't have that kind of framework. I think I was constantly searching for some kind of system. I think when you come from a religious background, which has that structure, yes, I felt like suddenly there was an empty space and I needed to fill it with something. I didn't know what that was. So I continued searching, really. I mean, I continued to do yoga, I continued to meditate. And then in my early 20s, I met a practicing Wiccan. And she kind of exchanged books and we chatted. And I knew there was something in there that I was interested in. But again, it was, I mean, she was very into the Kabbalah and stuff like that. Her coven worked with the Kabbalah, and I knew that wasn't me. Okay. I knew there was something in there that I was kind of intrigued and interested in. And then I remember at the time that I was kind of reading these books that this woman was giving me, I found a book by Caitlin Matthews. Yeah. Called The Goddess. I don't know if you remember. They were like, there was a little series of books called Element books. It was like a series, and they were like beginners books. So you had this beginners info, all linked to kind of spiritual ideas. It was just a tiny little book about the goddess, and I bought it and I read it, and it was really fascinating. But again, I still felt like I was on the outside looking in. I didn't really know how to use this information that it was kind of like an intellectual thing, but not really in my heart. And then really the next major step was that I kind of went back to college. I went to university to do a degree as a mature student in my kind of mid to late 20s. And I got the opportunity, I was doing an English degree, but I had the opportunity to do other modules. So I chose a module from the religious studies department, which was the female face of religion. This really interesting sounding module. And it was a module about goddess spirituality, and through an academic lens. I mean, I was looking at these things, but it was kind of like a eureka moment for me, because the things I was studying people like Starhawk and Carol P. Chris and all these people that were kind of American feminists or goddess spirituality people who were coming up with these kind of really interesting ideas about a female divine. And I got super excited about that, and I had this, I don't know, I think it was the first time I realized that the ideas they were coming up with about the goddess representing something that was embodied, like a spirituality that was embodied, and it was embodied in us, our bodies, and also in the earth, the seasons, that whole kind of cyclical round, which of course included death. And of course this was the thing I think we were struggling with so much. That kind of suggestion that I could have a spirituality that could heal me as an embodied being. Because I think from my mum's death, I was so terrified of being embodied, because to me the body could get ill, it dies, it disintegrates. It was like, and those things for me had continued, I think, to be traumatic, even though the years had gone by. I hadn't really healed that. And so from that moment, something changed for me, and I was fortunate because that was kind of mid-90s, and at that point there was just this surge in pagan, Wiccan, witchy publications. I mean, Waterstones was just full of pagan books. Suddenly these things that you couldn't access before were available. And so that was really the beginning. And I joined the Pagan Federation. I had some lovely people who came into my life at that point that I started to celebrate festivals with, kind of just
wonderful.
Yeah. We were all learning together, and we all wrote rituals for each other and kind of did this. It was a really, really lovely group. And that was the beginning, really. So, but I did that for a few years, and then I'm getting to this I'm getting to the point where I finally find OBOD. Because I read Philip's Druidcraft. I was sort of coming at things from like a Wiccan sort of point of view, or a very eclectic sort of Wiccan. I read that, and so I thought, oh, maybe I ought to sort of check out OBOD. So that's when I looked at the website, and I was just so impressed with it. It was just after 9/11, and I remember seeing a page where members were expressing their feelings after 9/11, and it was so beautifully done. It was like really measured and wise, and a lot of everything. People were there was a lot of kind of knee-jerk reaction after 9/11, so it was like this kind of sense that wasn't there on that OBOD page. There was a lot of heart.
Wonderful.
There's a lot of heart in OBOD, and I was very, very drawn to that. And so that was the beginning of my OBOD journey. And so I'm a kind of hybrid, really. I mean, I kind of still practice from a Wiccan perspective, blending with my Druidry and with my yoga and stuff like that. I take from different places, but yeah, but very pleased I found OBOD.
And of course, within OBOD, there is plenty of space to do that, to practice your spirituality from so many traditions.
Yeah, I mean, it's OBOD's great strength, I think. Yeah.
So, is Druidry something you are or something you do?
Definitely something. Well, I don't know. Probably something that I do, because I've become less and less comfortable with labels. I suppose I don't. I think if people say, are you a druid? I don't know whether I would say I am a druid. My practice is definitely druidic, in the same way that my practice is very Wiccan and I have yoga elements in it. But I've become more and more uncomfortable with defining myself too strongly. It's the labels that have become less and less important to me as my spiritual practice has gone on, and I think I've got more and more confident, like crafting my own path. It was quite interesting because I kind of moderate the Facebook page.
Yeah,
I have a lot of people who are really interested in Druidry, and they ask questions about it, and you can see people at the beginning really want that kind of structure and guidelines. But I find the more you kind of carry on, is it that there's that sense of freedom and confidence to actually craft your own. But I know I am part of a Druid family. I feel like I'm part of a family within OBOD. But I feel like we're all beavering away at our own little path, and there are things that are obviously that we all do that we find in common, but there are also those little details that are so personal to our own life experience, our own spiritual experience, that very personal spiritual journey that each of us kind of has. So, yeah.
And I think that's so beautiful about it. JJ here says there's a lot of heart in OBOD. So true, and gets right to the heart of it. And I think so. And that, that image like you just create of, okay, the threads that join us together, the shared values that we have, and then the space for us all to do our own thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the strengths about the order, actually, that space to be who you are, within the community as well, within the order. It's absolutely, really, really important. Okay, so you came to Druidry late, like you say. When has it supported you?
Oh gosh, I mean, from the get-go, really.
Okay.
I mean, when I joined OBOD, I kind of went through the Bardic grade in a year. It's quite quick, but
yeah,
Ovate grade was something entirely different. when my Ovate experience was intense, and at that point, I'd kind of come full circle in my life. It was almost like coming back to the situation I was in my teens, because my sister had been very, very ill, and at that point, my sister died during my sort of Ovate grade. And in very similar circumstances to my mum. She didn't have cancer, but it was very similar circumstances. She's kind of starved to death as well. So it was like this incredible situation where it was like coming back to this awful time, And the difference, it was very interesting, because obviously when that experience had happened with my mum, I felt like my spiritual path just crumbled away from me. It was a real lightning struck tower moment, in the tarot. It was just like, all structure, all scaffolding gone. But it was a totally different experience when my sister died, because by that stage, I think you always know when a spirituality is right for you, because in a sense it is there in those moments.
That's right.
I felt supported and held by that. I have this thing, we talk in the order about the inner order, the inner world, which we all share. We may be spread apart, but there is that inner grove that we're all part of. And I definitely felt the support of that when I was going through those experiences. And also, I think that not just Druidry, but I think, I suppose the one label I feel like I'm a pagan, and my understanding of life is very pagan. And I suppose within sort of pagan belief, I think there is always that room for I don't want to say darker experiences, because I think that's probably the wrong focus. Those more challenging experiences as being part of your spiritual journey. And I think it's much easier to find a positive language around those experiences of intense transformation, when your life is broken down and you really do perhaps at times feel lost. There's a language for it, I think, in well, not just pain, you know, because obviously there are Christian Druids or all sorts who would understand the same thing, but there's a language for I suppose going to the underworld and coming back again.
Yeah.
you know, it's like I in some ways I didn't feel like it was there in my Christian faith, although that may well have been because I was so young and I didn't have a very very complex understanding of that faith. It was a childish understanding, a child's understanding of that faith. But I drew a lot of comfort from the idea of an underworld journey, and that can bring strength and resilience and endurance, that there's a purpose in that, and that, you know, the purpose is not to break you down and to destroy you. The purpose is much more positive than that, and in a sense it's once you embark on that journey, it's kind of like part of the deal is for you to find what that positive experience is.
That's right. So, and I suppose that's the thing where, I mean, I grew up as Roman Catholic, so anything that was considered underworld was hell, not, so you wouldn't be going there willingly and coming back having learnt something. Plus with teachings and more dogma, or so everything is clearly laid out for you. Which may or may not help you. If it supports you, that's great. If it doesn't, like it didn't support you or didn't support me, where being able to journey to the other world, you're able to find out what it is you need to know yourself. And I mean, we can all go on a journey on the same time in the same room and come back with completely different insights, one for each of us, and that's what's really, really important. The value. There's a question here from Poppy. I don't know, but I'm and I think it's because you're so you have a foot in both. Is she's asking what's the difference between Wicca and Druidry? I think it's a very big question, but is there a way for you? How would you see the difference between the two? You know, because you're in both.
I think the kind of Wicca that I experienced really came from a kind of book learning Wicca that sort of came about in the 90s. I mean, if you were to speak to a traditional Wiccan, they wouldn't recognise what I was doing in the 90s. I see it as there isn't a lot of difference for me, actually. I don't think there is a lot of difference. I think it quite often comes down to perhaps the way we see deity. Certainly in traditional Wicca, I think there's a sort of a goddess and god aspect. It's duotheistic, maybe not so much an eclectic. And again, I think this is interesting. Again, when we talk about sort of labels, is that, you know, at one point it was like if you're a Wiccan, then you worship a goddess and god, but then all of a sudden there were like these hard polytheists who were coming out in Wicca and blowing apart that. Do you know what I mean? It's just like it's. But I think Wiccans celebrate the same festivals.
Yeah.
They probably have a greater focus on magical practice, maybe, than Druids, and maybe approach that magical practice in a slightly different way. But I think that's changing, because I think there's that blurring of boundaries between those those traditions, and I think that's got more and more so since the internet. You know, I mean, a lot of people on YouTube who are practicing witches, and a lot of what they talk about, I think, well, most people know, but would think, oh, well, I do that as well. So, You can be a Druidry medium. So I think the boundaries are blurring more and more. But like I said, yeah, I don't think I would be saying that if I was a traditional Wiccan, because I'm not, so I can't speak for those people. But.
And I don't know, this thing about if you ask 10 druids what's Druidry about, you get 11 answers. I don't know if it's the same with Wiccans, that you're not going to get one cohesive response to that, which actually is to me is a great strength, because it finds different expressions, which there's great freedom in this.
To the person who asked the question, do read Philip's book Druidcraft, because that explains it really well, I think. The kind of the differences and also the way they can be kind of used together as a spiritual path.
Yes, somebody, Stephanie, responded and said, yes, it's there on Druidcraft, it's on the website, and then the Druid Way, chapter 11, that was from Tara. Thank you for supporting Poppy in that question. I'm just going to come back to the cemetery, because, I was just struck me when I kind of, in my mind's eye, see the trees and the green, and then the sea of Philip Carr-Gomm, Poppy, my predecessor, the former chosen chief. You find him on druidry.org. I'm really surprised somebody's asking a question, who's Philip? But yes, it's Philip Carr-Gomm. So that, and I'm just looking at that sea of crocuses, and it really struck me when you were talking about the trees and nature, and also the ancestors. I mean, they may not be your ancestors, but they're our ancestors, our generic ancestors, our ancestors of place. How do you, or when you think of yourself as a future ancestor, how does that make you feel in terms of how you can be an ancestor? Because you have to be an ancestor now. It's not when.
Well, I mean, I feel a sense of responsibility. I think maybe we all live at a point in time where the responsibility feels greater. I think just because of the environmental kind of situation that we all find ourselves in. I'm very aware of the fact that our decisions have consequences. I know obviously that happens in life at any point, but our decisions at the moment, the consequences seem so enormous, and that can feel quite overwhelming. And I don't have children, but my partner has children, and I often think about their lives, and if they have children, what's the next sort of 50, 60 years, whatever. And it does fill me with a sense of panic actually sometimes. But it's just we are being faced with such huge personal tests, I think, and I don't always feel 100% up to that, but then I don't think maybe everyone does. So when I think of my descendants, I just hope that I don't let them down. I feel the sense of responsibility, I think. And I think many people do who are drawn to kind of earth-based religions. I think there's definitely that sense of being aware of being in that thread, being a kind of like a pearl on the string, we're all like those little pearls on that thread, and you just think, I don't want the thread to be cut. I want it to carry on. So yeah, and I suppose that's partly why I was drawn to Druidry and earth-based spirituality, because it gave me a sense of hope. I think there's hope in that.
It's interesting you talk about string of pearls. So I was just kind of a string of wisdom, going from one generation to the next. I suppose it's like living in the best possible way now in our own environments, with our small garden, our big garden, the farm, or whatever it is that we live, or apartment, but that somehow even being mindful of it, because sometimes it's that sense of, what can I do? I live in a city. How can I look after my landscape. It's even the smallest act can actually give us a sense of purpose and meaning. I remember Owen the Vardoon, who's one of my earlier guests, and he talked, talking about activism, and he said that even planting window boxes can be a form of activism in some way, because you plant a window, you have a window box in your windowsill, and people see it, and that actually has an influence.
Yeah.
Even those small things, that living by example or as a role model, or giving comfort or joy. I was on my bike this evening and I passed a house with window boxes, and it was like, oh, look at the color. And just straight away, there's that little bit of, kind of a bit of light. And it's those kind of things. And that, I felt really good.
Yeah.
Ellie has something to say. Ellie always has something really wise to say. I believe that feeling that sense of responsibility, although it can be heavy, is essential for us to deal with what we face. I agree with you, Ellie. It is also a good way to keep those big decisions that have to be made in check if we have to consider future generations. And I think that is so, so important.
Yeah.
And to be... Go on.
No. I was just thinking... No, you.
You're my guest.
I was just thinking, when you were talking about the window boxes, and I was just thinking about, when you were saying about tending to the little things, but I also think it's that thing about tending the inner landscape, because I keep on thinking about that link between the outer and inner, and obviously kind of taking action to take care of our environment, the physical environment, is really, really important. But it's also the things we do to take care of our inner environment, and like knowing ourselves better, feeling ourselves our sense of connection to other people through knowing ourselves better. It's those two spaces, because I think sometimes you can be so focused on the outside, and I think particularly at the moment that is quite a difficult place to be, being focused on the outside. There's so many problems and it feels kind of overwhelming. But I think when it's balanced with that, looking to the inner landscape, what am I feeling? What can I change? But I think there's a balance. Yes. We were talking the other day about that kind of balance between, here we are in a pandemic. There's this huge collective thing happening, which to a certain extent we have no control over. It's this thing that is beyond us, this massive collective thing. But of course, there are always little things that we can do on an inner level, or a smaller level, personal level, that can bring about kind of small changes within that. So it's I kind of think about the Serenity Prayer. You think there are things that I can change, there are things that I can't change. Give me the wisdom to know the difference. And I think it is knowing the difference. What can I change? I am part of this massive collective thing, which I don't really know whether we'll get through. I don't know whether we've left it too late in order to survive the environmental changes that are going to happen. But I don't feel powerless, because I think I look to that inner landscape and I thought, well, what can I save? What needs saving in this inner landscape? What needs changing? What needs tending? What needs nurturing? And maybe the pandemic has been really good for that, because I think people have spent a lot of time obviously indoors, and there are no distractions, and maybe there's time to think about that a lot more. I think it's I'm just fascinated by that thing, that connection between inner and outer landscapes.
Jill Cooper says, if we tend our inner environment well, we are less likely to want to exploit the outer environment.
Yeah, I think that's yeah.
And just to get back to Ellie's things around, to consider future generations. And I think there's something, when you look at the, what multinationals do, and with fossil fuels and all of that, and you kind of, are any of them thinking of their own grandchildren or their own great grandchildren, or is it just now? Do they think everybody's going to be okay?
I think people,
because I think about, I have children, and grandchildren. So if I think that far ahead, it's like there is an imperative to make my world, this place, as good a one as possible. But of course, we can't control it. And I know when my husband Howard, when he had his diagnosis of cancer, and we knew the outcome was not going to be good. But it was like, okay, we are going to live as fully as we can for as long as we can, and that's what we did. And there's still that, importance to have hope and to live as fully as we can for as long as we can, so that at least if we come to the last day, if that's how it ends, I don't know, that that we can say, okay, you know what, we did it for as long as we could, and now we surrender, and whatever the next bit is. Ellie says, I want to stay positive, looking outside the increasing frequency of business organizations aligning their sustainability issues with the UN Sustainable Development Goals are indicators of a change that will become embedded over time. I hope so, Ellie. I absolutely hope so, and that it's a genuine desire to do that. And maybe it's not too late, who knows? But even if it is too late, at least we spend the remaining time living as best and as fully as we can. That even enjoying the rest of it rather than, what is it, we're doomed, so we might as well eat, drink and be merry. That
it kind of comes back to what we were saying earlier as well about the underworld journey, and I do kind of think like we're all going on a collective underworld journey at the moment to a certain extent. I think, and I think the gift of that is that you underworld journeys kind of force you to be more authentically yourself. I think you're forced to look at certain things within yourself that need changing. It's almost like life says, you can distract yourself for so long, but really now's the time to look at this. So and in doing that, in becoming more authentically yourself, you don't compartmentalize those things. So when you were saying about those kind of corporations that end up acting a certain way in their business life, but then having children, and obviously not wanting their children to suffer or there not be a decent planet for their children to live in, it's stopping that compartmentalizing, which I think we do a lot in modern life. And it's easy to do that in modern life. You're kind of encouraged to do that. And I think maybe, the challenges we face at the moment do have gifts in them. And, it's just hoping that we're brave enough to face those challenges and look at those things that need kind of changing. But I mean, I kind of like, coming back to that idea of the underworld, I'm a great fan of, because I'm quite an eclectic kind of person. I love all things Egyptian. And I'm a great fan of Egyptian deity. I feel very, very drawn to Egyptian deity, and I love Sekhmet. Now, if you kind of read about Sekhmet, kind of historically, she's kind of like a goddess of pestilence, war, but she's so much more than that. I feel, because I think with those kind of very, very challenging sort of deities, they are the truth mirror. Quite often, I think when we are confronted with that energy, and I have this idea about deity is that you kind of like when you work with a specific deity, you are stepping into a current kind of energy, and I think you have a choice to fight against that current, or be carried away with it, or work with it. I always feel there's those three options always. And when you step into a current that is an energy like Sekhmet, if you fight against that energy, then I think there is pain and suffering, because it's, again, not confronting those things within us that are being requested to change. Life is requesting that you change in a certain way for your own health and well-being, I think. Sorry.
And life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about going with it and engaging with it and learning from it. I think suffering, what did somebody said? Suffering is having experienced pain without having learned anything from it. But that pain is a reminder. It's a flag. It's
but she was so interested because she was always described as an upholder of Mart, and of course Mart's the universal kind of order and balance. So there's always this sense that when you stand in that current, it's really difficult and you have to face really awful things and it feels really painful, your life feels like it's falling apart, that actually what's happening is you're being given the opportunity to find that balance and equilibrium again. That something has gone out of whack and now's the time to address it. And yes, it does feel a bit painful, but if you kind of go with it, if you trust that process, then you find the gift. And maybe that's what we are doing collectively at the moment, that the gift is just there. We've just got to go after it. But,
absolutely. You of course you mentioned so many things. You're eclectic, spirituality. Do you have a personal practice, like a daily personal practice?
I do, yeah. I mean, it's changed a lot over the years. I mean, I used to, spend what I call shrine time. My shrine time, I'd have my little shrine. I would celebrate full moons and festivals and spend a lot of time at the shrine. I don't tend to do that as much anymore. I've actually made a promise to myself this year that I'm going to celebrate all the festivals, which has been lovely with the online festivals. That's really helped kickstart my relationship. I mean, I would always honour the festivals in a quiet way, but I mean, actually sit at my shrine and light candles and just decorate my shrine.
You're a solitary druid?
I am now, yes, yeah. But what I tend to do most mornings, when I get up in the mornings, I always have quiet time. I tend to do it in bed. I have a cup of coffee, and I will use tarot and oracle as a way of connecting with my deities. I'm a real visual girl. I really love tarot, and I really love I love using oracle, but I do it not so much in not in a fortune telling way or anything like that. It is a way of me listening to my deities, because it helps me to focus. I think I'm quite a visual person, so if I have that visual image, I listen better. I think my mind is quite racy as a person, so it's like having that visual focus helps me just to sit and listen. So I do that every morning. I spend about an hour or so doing that every morning, which I find really, really helpful. I go through in and out stages of actually doing proper meditation. But that comes and goes. It's something that comes in and out of my life. But what has become a big part of my spiritual practice is running. I run. It's my, as you know, Eimear.
Yes.
I could draw for England on running, but I use running as a form of clearing my mind and grounding myself and connecting, and because it gets me out, I run in all weathers, so I see that as part of my spiritual practice as well. So those are the two things that I do daily, and then there will be other things that I do, sporadically.
Do you have a favorite tarot deck? Often people
oh gosh, well, I really love, this is not just, I'm not just being creepy now, but I love the Druid cross tarot. Yes. Nice. How could I not say that? But I go in and out of kind of tarot decks. I really like, there is I think it's called the Everyday Witch Tarot. I use a lot at the moment, which is a very sort of whimsical little thing. It's got lots of cats. I love cats. So it's covered in cats. Oh God, I've got so many of them. The Osho Tarot I really like. There are a few. You have favourite ones which you use and use and use and use, and then they get put aside. And then I use a lot of oracle decks. I use a lot of oracle decks connected to chakra work. I'm really interested in kind of chakra, the idea of chakras. But yeah.
Wonderful. There's a question from Tina here. Oh, it's a great name, Tina Teaspoon. I'm also solitary. Does this mean I do not have the full experience of being a druid? That is a concern of mine. It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, no, I've been a solitary for most of my practice, really, and I think if anything, you can have really intense experiences, because I think it focuses you. I mean, it's lovely being part of a group, and I have been a part of a group, not so much in a druid sense, but more in a witchy sense. And you have lovely, wonderful shared experiences. But I think there's great value in having that solitary experience and going with it. I wouldn't worry about that, Tina. Honestly, it's the journey's the thing. And, you know, there will be periods where you will share that journey with other people, and there will be periods where you will be on your own, and you will always gain something from both. I certainly have. So,
and the majority of our members are solitary.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you know, as you go through the grades, it's a solitary journey, unless you belong, maybe if you belong to a grove, and some groves offer support, but you have a mentor. But essentially, it's your journey that you take responsibility for. And we don't have a picture of what's a good druid or what's a real druid. Sure, we don't. Thank goodness. It's like we're very much a motley bunch, which is lovely. Which, you know, it just makes it such an interesting order to be a member of, when you see the rich diversity of all sorts of people. You know that.
It's your genuine. I think it's that when you have that genuine desire to connect to life. I think that's the thing. Yeah, that with Druidry, and probably any spiritual path, actually, it's. I mean, it sounds. I don't know. Maybe it sounds a bit kind of corny to say, you know, it's the pureness of your heart when you go into. But I really do believe it is. You know, if you have that genuine sense of wanting to learn and always be curious, be curious about, you know, the growth that you make on your path, be curious about other people, be curious about life. It's like, if you genuinely have that, then you will always learn. I don't think there's ever a moment where you suddenly become a druid. That's another question I get asked a lot on Facebook, that when will I become a bard? And I always say, the moment you say you are, you know, the moment you start practicing just on your, it's that, I think we have that idea that somehow we are working towards something, and you know, on one level, of course, you're learning and you're growing, but it's not. You know, the moment you say, oh gosh, I will be a bard in 18 months time, and then I get run over by a bus next week, then that's blown. You know, be the bard now. I say, just be the bard, or be the druid you are. The moment you feel called to that path, that is what you are, you know, and you will learn. Stop learning, you know.
It's a really interesting one, because it wasn't until I had finished, I'd written my bardic review, and right through the whole grade, I'm not a bard. Howard could write poetry. I couldn't. Okay, I belonged to an art group. I couldn't even paint, but I was artistic-ish, creative, but not a bard. And that was my narrative about me. And I was at a international gathering of shamans, and I started telling stories. And they said, you should tell stories, Eimear. I go, what? No. You can tell stories. I thought, you're a bard. Oh, but I had to, for me, my journey was, I didn't know I had to do this. It wasn't until I'd handed in my bardic review, that somehow I was free then. Because I was thinking of, you have to be a poet, you have to be a writer.
Yeah.
Yet I knew bards told stories, but somehow I seem to have missed that bit. And then I took up the harp in my OBOD grade, you know, so it's really, really interesting that, and I remember reading Kevin Manwaring's book, I think it's a bardic handbook, and he made the thing, he says, you're not a bard until people tell you are. And I think that was maybe, you know, when, and I'd always been like, you know, if there's nobody in the woods when the tree falls, does it make a sound? But then, you know, are you a poet if nobody reads your poetry? Or what makes you, or do people need to hear your stories or read your stuff before you're a bard? I don't know, but that was one narrative that he had about that you are a bard when people say you are, that you're acknowledged by your community.
Yeah. But I kind of, I don't know where I stand with that. I'd probably say no. You don't need to be. I mean, literally. I mean, I always think about my understanding of being a bard now. I think it's a bit like being a magician, isn't it? It's like you take a concept and you make it manifest, and how many different ways can we do that? We can bake a cake, we can make a garden, we can create a
That's
baby.
right.
And does that make us a bard? I think the idea of like limiting it just to those traditional sort of bardic arts, which I think help us see, we take a concept and then we make it real. We take a thought and we speak it, but it translates to all sorts of different areas in our life, and I find that really exciting. And
Yes.
you are, for me, the bard is almost like the magician. It's like you suddenly, it's like when kids suddenly realize they can create things, or you can mold things, and you can do that in so many ways, and that's so exciting. And the moment you have that thought, and the moment you make it real, even if no one's there, I mean, teenagers are writing angst poems in their bedroom.
That's right.
You're still a bard. It's just you're partaking in that creative act, which is kind of everywhere. And of course you can really see it at this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere. You can see that taking place everywhere in nature, suddenly. So yeah, no, it's you are a bard, Eimear. You are so a bard.
Oh, thank you. What would you say your greatest achievement has been, or what are you most proud of in your life?
Oh gosh, that's a really hard question, because I think I struggle with this, because I think I struggle with self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
and feeling that what I do is worthy. I have to really keep reminding myself, to be more appreciative of the things I've done. Quite often I look back and I think, well, I've done nothing. I've done nothing. I know I'm like 55 this year, and I keep thinking, oh my God, I can't see what I've done in that 55 years. But of course you have. If I think,
yes, you have.
Probably my proudest journey, my proudest thing is just surviving some of the things. I think certainly surviving my teens, because I think that was hit and miss.
Yeah.
Things that happened in my teens after my mum's death, which were really, really difficult. I kind of went a bit awry, and that there were some bad things that happened. And I think that the fact that I came out of that and survived that, I think I'm proud of. I suppose I'm proud. I don't know. Is that I find that really hard to answer.
Because often the notion of, well, what have you achieved? Well, I've written 3 books and I've become president of my country, or whatever it is. And that's not the kind of stuff I'm asking. It's like, that's a very good example. Your one is having survived your teens, having survived grief, and then the fallout, and, the loss of your secure base and foundation. And having survived that is a testament to your resilience and the resources you have. And, so somebody says 55 ? You found the well of eternal youth then. That's right, Maria.
You've achieved.
There you are. But I've seen your creative responses to people, and there's almost like something around your own experience of pain, suffering, loss, grief, despair, brokenness has awakened in you, or allowed you to express the deepest of compassion for people, because I've seen how compassionate you are towards people. And what a gift.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely. Yeah.
And I'm sure, anyone that you've responded to. Thank you for your posts on the OBOD Facebook page. I found much inspiration from this.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for your honesty. Yes, having survived is everything. So it's that. It's not about the big fame stuff. It's always these. I remember talking to a friend who didn't go beyond second level education, and she had children, and she had her own children, and she used to foster children as well. I mean, talk about a generous person. But she was in a women's group, and the women were going around talking about what they did. So they were saying, I'm a this, I'm a that, and that. And there was one woman who had a PhD. So my friend was thinking, oh my God, I've nothing. And she says, well, I'm just a mother. I have children. I stay at home. The woman with the PhD says, well, at least you have something to show for your life.
Yeah.
And that really brought her up. It's like, because this woman didn't have children, but she had the PhD. So it depends on what lens you look through. What is success? Is loads of money and lots of wealth, or is it actually to have wonderful friends around you, to have created a beautiful home? I'm not talking about it materially, but to be able to surround yourself with love and to be able to give love. Isn't that something that's really a sign of success?
And maybe none of us ever really see what we've achieved. And, maybe, you were saying about sort of like appreciating, your life is not a series of massive, great happenings, is it? It's a series of little things. It's the day-to-day things that make up the fabric of your life. And I think maybe when I was younger, I had this great plan about what I was going to do with my life, and a lot of those things didn't happen. But I think now I'm just so pleased that I've made it to 55. For me, it's an achievement. I mean, particularly, this year is the year that I've reached the year that my mum died. The fact is, I'm now the same age as my mum when she died, and so I feel like huge gratitude that I'm still here and I can still do the things that I do. And I think learning to appreciate those little everyday things, the fact that I have a lovely partner, I have lovely people in my life, I enjoy the work that I do. All those things are really, really important to me. So I guess my achievement is that maybe I've let go of being able to let go of some of the disappointments, because I think we all go through that period of sort of disappointment.
Yes.
We should have done this, we should have done that, those disappointments, and realizing actually, again, maybe accepting the things that you can't change, that you might,
Absolutely.
you had this plan, but life had other plans for you, and that's fine. You accept it, and the moment you accept it, your life opens up more, and you can let stuff in. It's so maybe it's just that you get better at living. Maybe I feel a little bit like I'm better at living than I was back then. I'm learning to make better decisions. I know I'm still imperfect, but I don't know, maybe it's that. Maybe it's, I feel grateful for the things that I've learned through my own experiences. But yeah.
Then there's lots of responses here. This is from Marcus Polonius. There is a magic, compassionate peace that survival can bring if you're open to it. You seem to have found and embodied that in spades.
Marcus,
I agree, Marcus. I agree. Somebody else says, thank you for the wisdom you're sharing with us today, Maria. You have gained so much deep understanding through suffering and grief. Ellie says, life is more than money that you earn. And then Cherry Carolyn, I couldn't agree with you more, Cherry, is we probably never know how a simple smile to a stranger changes that person's life. Absolutely. And then Ava, I think she's from Belgium. I'm not going to pronounce her name. One thing I learned from doing a PhD is that it doesn't help at all with taking away self-doubt. Absolutely. Yes, I have that title, but still suffering hugely from imposter syndrome. And I so get that, And then Angie Strachan, thank you, Maria. I needed to hear your wisdom after having a challenging day. So, and then letting go of disappointments. And that is a huge achievement. So I couldn't agree with you more. That and you mentioned, gratitude, your gratitude that, you've reached this age. And what else are you grateful for?
Well, I've started to feel, I mean, I think we were talking about the kind of like the underworld journeys thing. I think for me, I became quite sort of stuck in that place. I think life will take you to that place, and I think sometimes you can become a little bit crisis addicted. I think that I kind of found like the underworld, so you just go with it. You just face the challenge and come back up again. But you kind of, I think I became a little bit addicted to that experience. It felt like it was the only way to live your life, and I think that was partly a defense against, if I don't do that, then I think when you have bad things happen to you, you tend to think that if you relax and you become happy, the rug will be pulled out from underneath you and bad things will happen again. So you kind of like, I think there's that sense that somehow you always have to have your dukes up, you know. I'm
You have to be hyper vigilant.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I definitely think that kind of happened to me along the way. So I found a solution on one level, but then I just didn't know when the war had finished. I just kept kind of fighting. And certainly in the last couple of years, I've started to realize that there is kind of wisdom to be learned through joy.
Yeah.
Just enjoying yourself and just enjoying things. I didn't realize you could do that. You know, I just thought like, oh gosh, it's always got to be intense. You know, transformation and change always comes through intensity and challenge. And because that for me, I think had been the way that it had happened. I think maybe I was so dense that I needed that, that kind of challenge and change. But it's occurred to me of late that actually it can come through joy. You know, that actually you can transform drastically just through being joyful and loving yourself and being kind and all those kind of things that they're, you know, life is not all intensity. And it's funny.
I go on.
No.
I agree with you. However, there is something around engaging with that other part, that painful part. I remember when I was doing my master's in counseling psychology, I described it as 2 years of indulgence looking at my belly button. You know, going into, you know, group therapy, individual therapy, talking about my own process. And it was very self-indulgent, but it was luxurious because I was doing it full time. So I didn't have to worry about, oh, I can't get up today. I'm feeling low and I have to go and, you know, engage in the real world. And this was this space to look at this, for which I'm eternally grateful. And then I got out of it because you couldn't sustain that. So I think what you did is going in there is really, really important. And then you say, okay, been there, done that. Now I've done the painful bit. Now it's to allow myself experience joy and to move on. I think if you stay only go seeking for joy or happiness or lightness, you're not going to meet it either. I think it's about, you know, in the three cauldrons, the cauldron of motion, it has another name as well. That's gone for me. Well, the Carr-Gomm anyway in Irish, or is, in order for it to turn, you need both grief and sorrow and joy. You need both, and there's the importance of engaging with your grief and your sorrow, as well as your joy, and it's both. And I think that's what you've done.
Oh, I hope so. Well, I come back to the Egyptian thing because I always think of, like, Egyptians are very good at those kind of, that I always think of Sekhmet and Bast. You know, you've got two versions of cats. And although Bast can be a fierce thing, but I always think, like, you know, or even Sekhmet and Hathor, the idea that Sekhmet, you know, destroys humankind at one point because they've kind of gone against the god Ra, but she turns back into Hathor, who's the goddess of love. And this is kind of like this, again, that kind of sort of balance that we have that intensity and those big transformative moments, but yeah, you do have to come out of that. It's like you can't stay in the underworld.
No, you can't.
No. You can't stay in that place.
No. Somebody has to leave, but they say we need buckets full of Maria.
Oh.
So
buckets full of me.
and Tara McCormick says, my being needed to hear this exact conversation today. Thank you. So what has been the most reckless thing you've ever done?
Reckless? Oh God, I've done so many reckless things.
Oh, that's interesting. Go on.
Best left email. But I'm probably the one of the bravest thing I did when I actually left my marriage. I was married for 27 years.
Okay.
I met my husband when I was 17, and and my husband was a great person, really lovely person. It wasn't like it was, I hated my husband if I had to leave him, but there was certainly a sense where you suddenly come to a fork in the road, and it was a terrifying thing to do. I knew I had to leave. Something in me knew that I had to leave, but it was my entire adult life that I was leaving, and all that sense of continuity and structure, everything I'd known as an adult, really. And that was extraordinary. I look back on it now and actually I think, oh my God, how did I do that? But there was that sense where you know in that moment that you have to trust something. There's a voice in you, there's something telling you, and you have to trust that process. But it felt wildly reckless at that time. It felt like I left with 2 suitcases. And that was it. My entire life in 2 suitcases. And at what, 45, I suppose I was at the time, 45, and that felt like, gosh, should I be doing this? Most people at 45 are kind of settled and got their life sorted, and suddenly I left. I didn't have a job, I didn't have a home. I didn't know, it was just like being a teenager again. And I even wondered whether it was like me going back and trying to relive something that hadn't really happened at that time, because of all the other stuff that was going on. You think, oh my God, am I being super reckless here? I mean, it felt really reckless, but it was right. It was definitely, again, going back to the tarot, it was a full moment, sort of stepping off that precipice, and you have to trust in that moment, which is not to say it was all fun and laughs, because it really was difficult and a lot of it was very painful, but it was one of those moments in life where I didn't really overthink it. I'm a great overthinker. And it was one of those first times where I didn't really overthink. I just knew there was something in my gut that knew this was the right thing to do. So I don't know whether that's reckless, but it's
well, the funny thing about reckless is the things I've done would be considered reckless, but I knew they weren't. I knew it, just like you, this is the right thing to do. But anyone else, if I had to ask them for advice, they'd say, don't you dare do that, Eimear. That is a reckless thing to do. And yet I did them, and they were the right choices for me. Yeah. So it's when I asked Ellie at a Fireside Chat months ago, I think she said she just booked a flight to Nepal. Quickly, it was like I'm just going there, and it was like, what, it's being spontaneous. I mean, some people do reckless things and they don't work out, and then others do reckless things and they do. And it's around taking the risk. If you never risk, you'll never know. And I mean, it is like the Fool, taking that step and never knowing.
And I think if you don't, quite often, if you spent a life not doing that, ever doing that because you were afraid of the consequences, I think bits of you become very stagnant. I think there's a sense where quite often when you're pushed to do those things which feel reckless, there's a part of you knows that something's become stagnant and that something needs to flow again. It's like movement is needed at that point. And I think I knew that at that time, movement was needed. I had to make that kind of move. I regret terribly the pain, because obviously it caused a good deal of pain, to my poor husband. But strangely enough now, you never know these things in hindsight, but of course now his life he seems really happy. So, I think like maybe you never know, you think you're doing something reckless, but, maybe there's something else going on there. I don't know.
And sometimes I've had conversations with clients and things around settling. It's not bad. However, I'm not being nurtured, or there's some part of me dying here slowly. I'm not being abused. I'm not having a horrible time, but there's something there's a part of my spirit or part of me that's not being fed. And you could say, well, the unknown is too risky, so I'm going to stay here, and then allow a part of yourself to just slowly wither away, or you take that step. not knowing, and then to discover, my goodness, the joy both of us have experienced, even though I was the one who caused the hurt. Jason says, most of my most transformative moments in life have come from reckless attempts and leaps of faith. Absolutely. Poppy asks, are you happy, Maria?
Am I happy? Yeah, I am. I'm at the moment. I'm in a really good place. Yeah. It's strange to say that when we've just gone through the year that we've all gone through, but weirdly, I feel probably at the most settled I've felt for a long time. So that's really good. I never take that for granted, because I think, you know, life always happens, and you know, I do think, like, gosh, there's been so many people who've gone through such dreadful things this year, but and I feel grateful that I do feel like I'm in a kind of good place. But yeah, no, it's thank you for asking.
It's an interesting thing, you know, the word happy, because I'm coming up now to the 6th anniversary of Howard's death.
Yeah.
And I was aware in the years, you know, I think for 3 years after he passed, you know, dealing with intense grief, but I never ever once said I'm unhappy. I was sad. And I was aware, I would often say, I had these conversations with myself, I am not unhappy, but I am incredibly sad. Because there was there's the grieving piece, and dealing with huge loss, because, you know, Howard had filled up my life and left a big hole. But I also had so much to be grateful for, you know, 2 kids, really incredibly close friends who just held me, family, support, you know, a roof over my head, living in a nice environment. So much to sustain me, so that I didn't sink into some pit of despair. So I'm conscious of, you can be happy and sad at the same time. You can be grieving.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not talking about contentment. There's something else, you know, and it's because I know from, you know, for some people their life goal is to pursue happiness, and others say, well, you shouldn't. That's not a goal you should be pursuing. It should be, you should be looking for meaning, or pursuing your purpose, and then that happiness is a kind of a byproduct of finding meaning and purpose in your life. For example, I have clients come to me and say, I say, what do you want to be? I want to become more confident. Tell me how I can become more confident, self-confident. And I don't know how you can do that. You can't, that can't be your goal, but it can be a side effect of something else. When you achieve something, then that helps you build your confidence. And I think sometimes the same is with happiness. But to be able to recognize it, because often people, when they've fallen into a difficult place, they kind of go, my God, I didn't realize how happy I was then, when I compared to myself where I am now.
Yeah. And I think,
or vice versa.
Yeah. I think maybe we all know that happiness is really transient. It's like one of those things that comes and goes and comes and goes, and it can come and go and come and go in one day. But I think maybe a better word than happy is, certainly in describing it for myself, is when I feel connected.
Yep.
I think when I feel connected, I can still have down days and really up days, but if I feel connected, then I feel okay. And by that I mean, you know, I don't know, I feel connected to life. There have certainly been moments in my life. I mean, my dad died 6 years ago, and at that point it really felt like you know, obviously my mum had gone, my sister had gone, my dad, who was so important to me because he'd been my mum and dad for forever, you know, when my mum died so young. So it was such a massive loss, and I felt totally disconnected when that happened. After that, at that point, I was living in Glasgow, and Steve, my partner, and Steve's job, the same week my dad died, Steve lost his job. He was made redundant. So we lost our home. He was just, you know, one of those, just those points in life. And from that point on, after that, it was like someone had pulled the plug out of me. I felt like completely disconnected and not right at all. You know, there are moments in like life where you think, well, yeah, bad things happen, but this was like a major thing. And I suffered from sort of depression, really bad depression after that. That was a bad place to be. And that was horrible. That was, I can bear feeling sad, and I can but I can't bear feeling nothing. And I think when people suffer depression,
that's depression. Yeah,
feeling nothing. It's like that sense of numbness is the worst thing ever.
Yes, it is.
So for me to get back to a place where I feel connected is brilliant, even if, you know, sometimes I'll sit and cry and feel sorry for myself, or, you know, I feel connected again. I think, and maybe that's the aim, because I think sometimes with happiness it feels like, because it is so transient, it's an emotion, isn't it? It moves through and out of you. I think it's that thing, you know, we're so unused to just being with ourselves. We're so used to being in our emotions, and I think happiness is just one of those emotions that we can be in, but it just moves in and out of us. It's not us.
That's right.
But I think that sense of connection is us. There's something in that is us. When we feel that, it's hard to.
And that's what I suppose you mentioned connection, for me, meaning and purpose. It's all of that, and that interconnectedness, because then when you're not alone, when you have that, either you're connected to other people or to
something intangible,
or nature.
I know.
So Tara says, in my bipolar disorder, sometimes I feel everything and it's almost too difficult to exist. Yeah, I can imagine that it can, and I'm just interested, Tara, what you do to help you exist. You know, for me, I mean, somebody mentioned, you know, having a bad day. I can't remember. I've lost the thing about. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Dean White. If I have a down day and still go out for a walk in nature, I can still feel connected to myself, which helps me. And I certainly would find that for me, it's trees. So if there's a woods near me, and I can just kind of bathe in the trees and the greenness. Tara, you say you wait. I think also that notion of this too shall pass, because like this week I felt down, and it's kind of, okay, I'm going to sit with this. I'm not going to fight it, because I wait for it to pass moment to moment. I think that's really, really important. And I think this is Tara's answering again, that this pandemic is teaching us to live in this moment, because that's all we can do, and live as fully as we can, even if it's in a numb place, or in a place of pain or despair or sadness. I think that's important. And Druidry is teaching me to go through it, the worst. I think it's lovely to hear that, Tara, you know, that Druidry can offer us, and I know for me in my grief, having that framework, having had that behind me, you know, the years of Druidry supporting me has just been so profound. And trees. Wonderful sharing. This is from Marcus. I identify so much. There is so much strength in your vulnerability. That ability to go to a vulnerable place and see it for what it is. Absolutely. I think vulnerability is around at the heart of relationship. It's at the heart of intimacy. And it also takes us away from that place of hubris that is one characteristic that humans have, but that we are vulnerable and we can't control everything, but we can go with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think, well, we always say there's a strength in vulnerability, and there really is. It's like, and I think that idea of, you know, when you're vulnerable, you're open to life. I think that the sense that you can, and if you're open to life, then you're open to the healing that can come with that.
That's right.
And if you know, it's easy to shut down if you're vulnerable, and I think to want to sort of shield yourself, and as comforting as that can feel for a while, I think if you do that long term, like, it's a very, very painful place to be. There is such a relief in just allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Actually, you don't have to. It's a bit like the clenched fist, isn't it? It's like, if you're constantly doing this the whole time, it takes a lot of energy to be.
It does indeed.
And if you it's just, I think being okay with your vulnerability is just like that, like releasing all that tension and
the surrender.
Yeah. And the thing is, you are held. You don't realize it think in those really awful moments, sometimes you feel like you are not held. And I truly, honestly feel that we are always held. You know, there might be different definitions of what we are held by, but I always feel like you are never truly alone. You know, there's always something. I can't. I think it was Lawrence Durrell. I will paraphrase now really badly, but I remember that it was a book that he wrote called The Dark Labyrinth. Funny enough, about underworld journeys. And he says something about, you know, you're never given anything that you can't bear. And I think he's paraphrasing someone else who said that, and I can't remember. I'm terrible. My memory's awful. But that idea that, you know, when we struggle, you know, I don't think struggle is put in our life to break us. I really don't. I know some people get broken by struggle. And I would never play down, you know, the fact that some people don't come back from
That's right.
people that really hurt them and damage them. But I don't think that's life's intention. I quite often hear people say, you know, when they feel quite cynical about life, and quite often people talk about, oh God, why would God make this terrible thing happen? And I think, well, I don't think that's what's happening. It's not about a punishment or anything like that. It's like, you know, I think, you know, when life happens to us, when bad things happen to us, it draws out our compassion, it draws out our sense of connection to each other. It does draw out the meaning in life. You know, you could see any number of natural disasters and see just the extraordinary courage and compassion of people in those situations, or in war-torn areas, whatever. The hope that people can still muster in the most dreadful of situations.
Absolutely.
And I think, like, oh my God, if you see that, you know that just in your everyday life where everything's fine, you can do that too for yourself. You know, I think that sense that we share this earthly journey together, and we are all teaching each other to live that well, you know, to do that journey well, is an amazing thing. And Druidry certainly shown me that, because I think Druidry has that real focus on interconnection, that we are all interconnected, not just the human family, but the whole earthly family, every being on this planet. And that sense that we can all learn from each other, that it's okay not to know. That's the first thing.
That's right.
We don't come into this world thinking like, I've got a little checklist of things to learn. We don't know. We will never stop learning. That there will always be someone there in life that will be able to teach you what you need to know at this particular point in your life. You just need to remain open to it. Those people are there. There are so many people, you know, that have popped into my life, you know, those little synchronous moments, who kind of teach you things and get you through ultimately. And that's a wonderful thing, I think. You know,
I find it such a beautiful feeling of people coming together. And somebody says, my ancestors are with me, willing me on. And I think I've done some ancestral work, and when I've gone back in and stepped in the stood in the shoes of my ancestors and felt it in my body and the pain, I thought, how did they do it? It's like, and somehow have they passed on that resilience to me to carry on with that as well. And I think that's really, really important.
And I think that what you do in your life will help heal your ancestors, because I think that continues.
That's right.
Got nothing to do with time, in a sense. I you know, I've certainly felt that with my, once I started to learn more about my more recent ancestors, you know, family.
Yeah.
About and you discover situations in their life that suddenly make sense of your own life as well. And you suddenly,
that's right. Yes.
Been compelled to do these things, and in a way you heal that. I think you do heal ancestral wounds, or you fulfill certain things that are needed for your ancestral line, you know, quite often without even knowing that you are.
That's right.
But I think that's what's so lovely about the kind of Druid work, is that you become more aware of that kind of connection. And again, it's that extension of us all teaching each other to live life well. you know, we do that for each other, even the people who are long gone. You know,
that's right. Now, it's interesting, 2 comments here. Francis McGuinness, I've worked with my ancestors for nearly 15 years, wrote them a musical to heal colonization trauma. Wow. And they're always there. So, and then Jill Cooper says, time isn't just linear. So yes, we can still heal things in the past. I think absolutely. And I think maybe the patterns that we carry in now reminds us, okay, we can do something about it now. I can break a pattern or tweak it in some way. Yeah, and this work is really powerful that it can allow us to do this. Speaking of, well, I suppose there's the past and then our concerns about being as ancestors today and the future. Tell me about one concern you have about the modern world.
One concern. What's my biggest concern about the modern world? I think it probably, I mean, the internet's a wonderful thing, but I think we are learning all the time how to communicate in terms of the internet. I think there's something that our understanding of information and knowledge and being discerning about those kind of things, because I think there's such gifts that can come from being online and having that connection to people, you know. The experiences with the ceremonies, the OBOD ceremonies, seeing that connection and stuff like that. But of course, you know, there's been a great deal in the news kind of recently about the kind of misinformation, and it feels to me at the moment that we are really in the early stages of learning how to use this gift that is the internet, and you know, that process of the fact that we are all interconnected. I mean, you really obviously feel it online, but I think we are still learning how to communicate with each other via it, and how to discern, you know, what is useful information, or I don't know, and that bothers me a little bit. Not so much in the spiritual community, I think, but I you know, there's part of me that fears that for younger people. I think certainly kind of negotiating Facebook and Instagram and just any kind of sort of social media for younger people is really, really difficult. And for me, that is a spiritual concern, because I think it's, you know, I mean, I feel quite hopeful that, you know, it's an area that we'll become more savvy with and more discerning with. I think it certainly needs it at the moment. I think it, you know, there are obviously things that are cropping up in the collective that suggest that we need to look at it a little bit more deeply.
We certainly do. Jill Cooper says it can be hard to stay open and trusting without being naive. And I think, and I would agree that, and this is from Tina, I just wish people would realize the impact that on the negative things they say online. And I agree. And there's something around being able to, people often not thinking critically enough, and being able to discern and discriminate. And often the word discriminate is seen as something that's negative, but I'm talking about discriminating, you know, rubbish from, or being able to discern between what may be true or maybe not true, or there may be, maybe in this time of uncertainty, some people are looking for certainty and absolutisms, and you're not going to find it. And if you're authoritarian in any way, then you end up with these battles that we see. And
but what's interesting with the internet is that it kind of brings those things to, it's almost kind of the shadow side of things surfaces very quickly, but in it, you know, in a good way, that there's something positive about that, because it can be addressed much more quickly. You know, things that maybe sort of churn away under the collective suddenly, you know, take ages to come to the surface, or particular events. I think there feels like there's a speeding up of it. I don't know whether that's just my perception of it, that it feels like I don't know, it seems to be happening at a faster rate where those things surface. I mean, obviously we've seen it over the last year. I think the pandemic has given us a chance to look at all sorts of things that are happening in our societies that need addressing. So it's a positive thing, but with that comes all the shadowy stuff as well. And it sounds like we're learning to kind of maneuver our way through that, to navigate our way through it. Yeah, so it's, but I think I'm a bit of a Luddite as well. I think, like, you know, scary technology, I do kind of feel like it's maybe that's one of the things I sort of fight against, that it all felt much simpler when we were living in a village and there was only 10 of us, after saying that, oh, isn't it wonderful, we're all interconnected. But sometimes you go online and you just think, oh my God, I just want to go back into bed, because it feels sort of overwhelming. And maybe it is that, you know, that sense of learning how to cope with the fact that the world has suddenly become a very small place and you can't avoid those things. With maybe is that acceleration of learning that comes through that real sense of connection to so many people, and we're still sort of learning to deal with that. Hurrah for the woods.
It's a really interesting thing, because I remember, you know, growing up in a village, and we had this thing about, you know, the valley of the squinting windows, you know, people just looking out behind lace curtains, and who's that going down the street and what are they doing, and everybody knowing your business, and that sense of, oh my God, I can't do anything. And the internet, the social media is the same, because people expose themselves. I kind of go, do they not remember the valley of the squinting windows? I think they're all too young. I remember moving to Dublin from rural Ireland and thinking, oh, I love the anonymity. Nobody knows who I am and I can do what I like. And then I moved to Kilkenny. And I remember the first time, I must have been here a good many months, maybe 9 months, maybe a year. I don't know. I went into a shop and someone said, hello, Eimear. And I was so thrilled. It was the shopkeeper who greeted me by my name. I hadn't realized that actually it is nice to be known and to be recognized. I'm not talking about as a celebrity or famous, but that somebody knows you, like you're a member of our community and welcome, or I see you and recognize you as a member of this community. And I thought that was lovely. And so there's a price to be paid for having a tight-knit community around you, because you sometimes be suffocated. But there's also that value of being held. And then there's, you know, upside of being anonymous. You can be free to explore and discover who you are, but then you don't have the supports when you need them. So it's around, I'm maybe harnessing the best of both worlds, but being able to discern. And I think that's to be able to do that. So Francis says, I want to live in Ireland. It's the only place I feel totally alive. That's really interesting. I don't know if you're Irish, but I absolutely love living here. And having lived, say, 3 different African countries where I loved, and I really appreciate living here, particularly the climate. Most Irish people whinge and whine about it, but I absolutely love it. And the older I get, the coolness suits me. I do love sunshine, I do love warmth, but I do like the changes in seasons.
So do you feel a sense of belonging, Eimear, where you are? You feel that belonging?
Yeah, and I'm not from here, and it's really interesting. I come from the Midlands. You know, you were talking about the flat marsh of the sea. Well, I come from the bog, and everything is flat. And you can get lost in the bog very, very easily. Everything is flat, and you've no landmarks, so you can actually get lost in a bog. And who was it? It's either one of the Dublin poets. I don't know if it's Louis MacNeice or oh God, another fellow's name is gone. It was like, it used to drive me crazy at the time. It was like, and the dreary Midlands with their tame canals, because and I really would, because I was in a boarding school and there were girls in my class from Tipperary, and they said, and I was in Athlone in the middle again, flat, and she'd say, I hate this flatness. I just miss the mountains of Tipperary. And I actually do like an undulating countryside. I do. Although North Kilkenny where I am is fairly hilly, but we don't have any mountains. I know it's hilly because of my bike. I wouldn't have noticed it otherwise. There are hills. But I didn't belong in Offaly. I never felt I belonged there. So it's a really interesting thing. When I lived in Galway, I was in college in Galway, and we used to go there on holidays to Connemara from a very young age, and always felt really, really connected there. And I went to school there for one term, to a school where children didn't even speak English, in order to learn Irish, when I was 12, when I was 11 actually. But I remember when I was in UCG, in the university there, I would be going on the train And as soon as we come into Oranmore, which is a few miles outside Galway, and I would see Galway Bay, I would start to cry that I was coming home. And each time I did, it was a really profound thing. And this is at, 17, 18 years of age. And I haven't gone to Galway by train since then. My son lives there now. And then I moved here when I met Howard. And I belong here. I belong to the landscape.
Yeah.
And I have found the people locally have been very welcoming of me, even though I'm weird and a druid, because this is hurling country. It's very Irish, but people have been really, really kind. But the land has claimed me. And that's a really interesting thing. And that's what the Druidry is about, is belonging to my landscape. It doesn't belong to me, but I belong here. So, and when people ask me when Howard passed, would I go back to Dublin? Because that's where I had been living when I met him. And I thought, no, this is where I belong. I don't know where I'm going to be, but right now, this is where I am and this is where I belong. I may move. I have no idea. But I said I'd never leave Dublin, and I did. So I can never make any statements about what I'm never going to do, or I'm never going to go anywhere. But and I've also had a connection when I lived in Africa. So I lived in Lesotho for 3 years. I lived in Kenya. I have a house in Tanzania. Well, it's a shack, and I have close friends in Tanzania. And there's a part of my heart there as well. But every time I went to Africa, once I joined the order, each time my roots became deeper here. So I'm really, really grounded.
And maybe you always have more than one place where you have that sense of belonging as well. It's like, you can love more than one person, can't you? So I think that's that kind of connection.
That's right, absolutely.
And for different times in your life as well, maybe, there are different places for different times where, maybe we have many inner landscapes, and at different points in our life, we need to engage with that place. It's that inner and outer connection again, isn't it? Yeah.
That's right. And I just say, Tina says, I'm not living in a place I feel connected, and it's very hard on my spirit. And I said, Tina, I can imagine, and I'm wondering, is there any way that you can find the smallest of connections for the time that you're going to be there? Or, if you can leave, but if you can't leave right now, if you can't leave at the moment, is there some way of making some tentative connection so that you can kind of have a little bit of ease for your spirit? I don't know. Or even find one tree or one plant or one little patch of ground that you can say, okay, I can have some connection here. I don't know. So anyway, that was just something, but I'm just very, very grateful that I have been able to connect. I remember reading an account of somebody who'd been in solitary confinement in a prison and eventually got out. And they were being asked, how was it they survived or what helped them? And they said they had a tiny window that they were actually able to look out. And there was one tree. So like you're talking about a prison yard. So you're not talking about any nice landscape or nice buildings, but that he could see a tree. And that was his lifeline. And that was his connection. Oh, yeah. So Jill says, can you find a tree you can make friends with? Speaking now, wise minds, Jill. We won't finish it. But it's that. And it's really interesting that you can have that. Yes, I do in my imagination and with nature. Yes. And I know when Howard was dying, he was in the bed where he was downstairs, and he could look out into trees, and it was like that was all he could do. But that was a lifeline. I mean, obviously he was at home, but even connecting, having a window, if you're confined to bed or you can't move, just find some vista for yourself. And of course, it's certainly if you can do it in your inner plane, which is great. It's not a substitute for being able to see it with the physical eye, but it's around managing a difficult situation to the best possible way that you can do. I think
I live quite close to Selborne, which was where Gilbert White lived. Gilbert White's he's a sort of very famous sort of naturalist. He kind of was the daddy of kind of infield sort of study of stuff. I mean, he discovered that earthworms were important for the important and that birds migrated and stuff like that. But he lit Selborne's. I mean, it's a very beautiful place, but he was there, I think, 17th century, that be right?
Okay.
17th century. But he Selborne Hanger is this really, really steep wooded kind of hillside, and the village kind of lives sort of in its shadow. And at the point that he lived there, it was in the winter, you couldn't get in and out of the place. It was really difficult. And I think he'd gone to, it was either Cambridge or Oxford. I mean, he ended up being a vicar in Selborne, but he had ambitions to travel the world and do all these things, which we're talking about achievements that don't happen. It didn't happen for Gilbert, so he ended up being stuck in Selborne. But in being stuck in Selborne, what he did, he kind of developed the sort of botanist square, so that you would take like a square of wood, like a picture frame, and just place it on the ground and then just study like all the things in it. It's that kind of idea.
Okay. Yes.
What he did that with his environment, really. So he started to study, he got curious about crickets, and he kind of wrote this kind of sort of paper on crickets, and just discovered things that other people hadn't, because he was confined to that space. He just started to really look at that small space. So like, again, it's like that idea of the botanist square, that you might only have that square patch, but if you look and you look and you look, that patch just opens up and it becomes like a little mini universe. And I found that really inspiring, because I've had moments where I felt, searching for home, that sense. I don't feel what you feel for Kilkenny. I don't feel that really for Portsmouth. I mean, I appreciate it. But it didn't feel, Scotland felt like home. I felt such a connection to Glasgow, and I really hated leaving. It was really, really painful. I certainly didn't have that. I mean, I think was it China saying that she didn't feel at home. I had the last place I lived in Lee. I felt that it was so difficult. I feel so out of place. This is not where I'm meant to be. That's what I felt. I thought, this is not where I'm meant to be. I'm not meant to be. But you do kind of have to use that process where you think, well, maybe there is something there. Like, it's like getting out your mental botanist square and kind of try and look at the place and just look and look and look, and maybe something kind of like opens up. It's not always easy though. It's not always
No,
easy.
it isn't. And of course, with the pandemic and restrictions, we're told now is the time to explore. We're confined to 5Ks.
Yeah.
What can you find within your 5K? And because I don't know about in the UK, but certainly Irish people a lot like to say the weather's, because they whinge and whine about the weather. We have to go to Europe to have a sun holiday because we can't cope with the bad Irish weather. And of course, it hasn't happened. And that notion of a holiday isn't a holiday unless you're out of the country. And like last summer, they're saying to have staycations. And I like traveling, but there is so much to discover here.
Absolutely.
As there is where everybody is. But to be able to find it, and like, I like that idea of your botanist square, if it's either in your head or actually the whole notion of, because it's interesting when you have a square and you're confined, often that isn't a constraint. Actually, it gives you permission to look for more detail and to make more discoveries, where if your field is too big, you're missing things.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's that thing about we're very scared of limitation. I mean, I think this, because I love running, I follow a lot of runners on Instagram, and we all have conversations about running faster, running further, running all these kind of things, and I can't run fast, and I can run reasonably far, but I know I have limitations, partly due to my age, and and just maybe, I don't know, that I'm not a born runner or whatever, but I find it really interesting that there's this whole positive kind of thinking thing in the running community that says, all things are achievable. And I said, but there's a kind of, there's a gift in limitation, that what happens when you hit your limit? Do you see it as a restriction, or do you see it as something else, as an opportunity to discover something else in you? And I think that is the idea of that, that phrase. It places a limit on you, but we have this notion that limits are a bad thing. And so,
Right.
actually sometimes they're not, you know, I know sometimes they are, but actually sometimes they're not. And it's kind of learning to, I suppose, look at that slightly differently. And yeah, look deeper.
I know in terms of, I'm not a poet, but Howard used to do it. He was quite wild, a very quiet man, but very wild, as in like a wild animal, you know, shy. And
Yeah.
but he discovered England's, which is a Welsh bardic, and is it England's and Senru's? Yeah, then you have the haiku, which is the Japanese uh, framework for writing. And with either the England, I don't know if you had to have so many, the last, the first word of a line had to be the same as the last line as the previous line, or whatever it was. And that it was quite a tight convention. And he actually discovered huge freedoms in those conventions, that actually it allowed more creativity, more imas, more awan to come out than if it was, okay, write a bit of free verse. And he found that fascinating.
Yeah.
And he was surprised because he didn't like constraints. But he thought, I'm going to follow this, and the beauty in that. So I think, and it's not until we're actually at that edge of constraint that we can be pushed into a creative place, or another way of looking, or a place of insight.
Well, it cheers me up a bit, because I feel like as I get older, I feel like, you know, there is, without doubt, as you get older, there are limitations that get placed upon you. Things change. You know I can't do the things that I can do when I was in my 20s. And there's part of me that feels quite glum about that. But again, it's that thing where we miss an opportunity, don't we? In something, maybe shrinking is the wrong word, but when something feels like it's being constrained, you know, it's again, it's down to do with your perception of something, isn't it? It's what you are choosing to see in that. But
that's right. One more, because you know what, we've gone over 2 hours. So, just what is non-negotiable for you? What will you not compromise on in your life?
I think I think sometimes I have had to compromise when I've not wanted to do on certain things, particularly practical things. I mean, making a living, there has been points in my life. I mean, I was a musician for most of my life, and that was very, very difficult. And I think I got to a place where I compromised that creative side of myself in order to survive financially. I think a lot of people get put in that position. I don't think we live in a world, in a society that values creative effort enough, or feels that, I don't know, I think it's very difficult to make money out of singing or making art or any of those kind of things. It's really difficult. You know.
What music? What's your music?
Kind of all sorts of things, really. I mean, when I first started out playing music, with my first husband, that was, I mean, it was kind of sort of blues music and stuff like that. I was very.
Do you play an instrument?
Black music. I play piano, but I've never played piano in a sort of band situation or anything like that. I've just sung.
You just sung.
Well,
you just let that. If I didn't know you were a singer. We're running out of time, but I'm going to get you back again. I didn't know you could sing.
Well, maybe I can't. Maybe nobody's told me.
Would you sing a song?
No, not now. Are you kidding?
I didn't know you could sing.
It was the thing that I really kind of wanted to do. I trained as a dancer. I wanted to sing. I actually wanted to go on the stage, but you know, as so many of us do. But yeah, but the kind of music sort of developed into other things, and online probably became more sort of folky and stuff. But I always thought I would never compromise that, and then just financial difficulties and all that stuff, that was really, really difficult. But I think you can still sort of, I think you have to kind of stay true to yourself, and you know, I think if you place yourself into a situation where you are really unhappy or really, really struggling because you feel you're having to do this because someone else expects you to do this, or society expects you to do that, then you can't compromise those things. There are some things within you that are really deep
Yeah.
and important that you should never ever compromise. And all you can do is find the best way of getting as close to being able to manage that as possible. I don't think you can do it 100%. You know, sometimes you do have to, you know, I've worked in Asda because I've had to survive.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was constantly trying to think, well, I have to hang on to this creative thing. You have to be true to the most important parts of yourself. So it is those things that are most important to me. I feel like I should never compromise those things. You know, never. There have been moments in my life where I've almost lost them, and that's been really, really awful. And
yeah. Do you know Trish Campbell?
I do know Trish Campbell.
Well, she says she can sing. She says she can sing beautifully.
Thanks, Trish. Trish and I lived on the Isle of Wight for 4.5 years, and Trish was lovely. She was my lovely friend on the Isle of Wight. So,
oh, wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. So, final question. What is your favourite ceremony? Oh, you know, on the Wheel of the Year.
Oh. Well, you see, for the longest time, I thought I was a real Samhain girl. You know, again, Underworld Journeys. You know, that time of the year comes Samhain, it was like, getting really excited. Now, I went through. I think it's been different ceremonies at different points in my life. You know, I think Imbolc's really beautiful. I always really, really enjoy Imbolc. I think the answer will have to be whichever ceremony is coming up. Because it's that kind of thing. When I do really love that. I love living. You talking about loving the weather. I love living in this country because, you know, the change in seasons is just brilliant. I mean, it's just wonderful, isn't it? You know, you just at this point, I get really excited when that moment when you get that real spring green on the trees. You know, just before bells and the blue bells come up. I mean, what's not to love about that? But at the same time, you know, come when the leaves start turning, or even when the leaves are completely bare, I get excited about all of them, to be honest. So I'm going to say wherever we are, there's my favourite. It's my favourite festival.
I think that's really, really important. You know, I mean, I'm the same. There's, you know, everything is yellow from all the daffodils where I am at the moment, and you're talking about different shades of yellow. And then you get the blue of the crocuses, and then I've got some violets in my garden as well. And then we'll come into bluebells, and the dandelions will be there, and bluebells, and then so on and so forth. And I love looking at the bare trees against a blue sky, and or even looking at the frost on the sleeping plants. So grateful for such a variety of of weather experiences. I mean, it would be lovely if we had a longer growing season for food and things here, but which we don't. But it's still, I just love that, just the variety. It's magical for me. Wonderful.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there completely. Yeah.
Well, you know, I did say I'm going to have you back, and JJ has picked me up on that. It's been an absolute joy talking to you, Maria, and I hope our audience loved listening. Yes, so thank you, Eimear and Maria, for a lovely evening of chat. It's been inspirational, wonderful session. I think you've been an absolutely joyful guest. Okay, such an interesting and enlightening chat between you both can resonate with a lot of what's been discussed. Much love, so much love. The happiness of Maria's storytelling. Thank you both for a wonderful evening. Until next time. So it has been an absolute joy, Maria, as always. I mean, we've had many conversations that I said you have to be on this. So
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. It's been lovely. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed being had. So listen, don't go anywhere. I'm just going to turn you off for a minute and say goodbye to everybody here. Where's my here we are. So listen, thank you so much, and for the wonderful comments. It's really, really wonderful. So Maria and I will both look at those, read them. It's great to have so much interaction with an audience, and I'm so glad that you appreciated my guest this evening. So I look forward to seeing you next week for another Fireside Chat. In this part of the world, our clocks go forward at the weekend, which means we're going to have 1 hour extra of brightness in the evening that I can't wait to look forward to, because I like the long evenings. So until next Thursday, slán go fóill agus bígí slán. Bye bye.